Great, so introduce the panel. As you can see, we have a fine lineup and plenty to get stuck into. So I'd like to start by just getting a sense of vehicle logistics in Mexico. Starting with you, Jonathan, can we get a sense of how production is performing in terms of volumes versus your expectations for 2022?
Well, as it has been already mentioned, the automotive industry was not the exception of these issues that we have been living in the supply chain and the shortages in general. However, in the case of GM, specifically through a strategy that we set in 2020, we have been fairly successful on making sure that our production schedules are relatively stable since Q3 2021. And by working closely with different functions within GM, we have been able to produce or to keep our production at regular levels since I think that time. So as of now, I would say that our production, at least for GM in Mexico, has been relatively stable during this whole year.
Well, that's excellent to hear, and perhaps not the case across the industry. How has this stabilization then impacted the network and flows specifically for General Motors?
Well, in our case, we had many different challenges as everybody else, but in our case, we are the largest car manufacturer in Mexico. We are the #1 exporter in the country, and obviously that comes with some additional challenges. In this case, we essentially, and I think that was mentioned already, had been adapting to the situations as they have been coming up. There is not a recipe by itself. The name of the game over the last 2.5 years has been flexibility, agility, adaptability, and the way that we have managed to accomplish that has been first through our people. I think that the commitment and the engagement of our team has been fantastic. We have worked closely with, I think our interaction with other functions increased exponentially during this crisis, from production scheduling, sales, even the dealership network, through our business partners, some of which are here. So every time that we have faced a different challenge, essentially what we have was just simply to use our scale, or use our relationships, and simply adapt to the situation. Unfortunately, there are not that many options to move a finished vehicle, so it's not like you have many alternatives. So we have had to play with our space, our infrastructure, our partnership with the 2 rail carriers that are in Mexico, and introducing new players in the truck and the ocean space. The combination of all that is what has allowed us to manage these challenging times where we are actually producing pretty regularly, but we don't have the capacity that we used to have to simply move them one way or another.
Excellent, thank you. And sort of speaking of the network capacity, perhaps, Antonio, I'll come to you, looking at the wider industry. How does current demand and capacity at the ports and across the trucking sector compare to the last couple of years?
Well, thank you, and good morning to everyone. Actually, I was going to share with you a few slides. I don't know if you can show them over there, in order to give a little bit of better understanding.
There you go.
Okay, good. So in this slide, we can see the Mexican production, the exported vehicles, and the national sales, and how the volumes have behaved since 2020 and until the end of this year in a forecasted volume, of course. Starting with the Mexican production, we see that in 2020, more than 3 million vehicles were produced, and by the end of this year, it's expected that more than 3,300,000 vehicles are going to be produced. That represents an increase of 10%. In the case of exported vehicles, in 2020, it was the volume. It was 2.7 million, and it's expected this year to be more than 2.8 million. So that's a 5.5% increase in the volume. And the national sales Back in 2020, in Mexico were sold around 950,000 vehicles, and it's expected that this year this volume will be close to 140,000 vehicles. So that's more than a 9% increase. I would like to point out, to remark, that in the case of the national sales, normally, if we take a look at the statistics in the last years, around 25 to 35% of the volume happens in the last 3 months of the year. So that explains a lot the peak of volume that we are going through. And well, we can see that, taking a look to this, we can see that there is a clear increase in volume. But when we go further, can we pass to the next slide, please? We take a look to, for example, what's going on with the vehicle sales in Mexico, but taking a look to the split between the national production and the import of the vehicles. So back in 2020, that was around, let's say, 60% imports, round numbers. But by the end of this year, this number is going to be 70%. So that means that the share of the import vehicles increased, or is increasing, more than 18%. And then we go further. Of course, not every vehicle that we import goes through, come in through the ports, but taking a look to Lázaro Cárdenas, we can see that, and we can understand, we all know that Lázaro Cárdenas is going on through a very difficult time in congestion. We see the numbers, and back in 2020, the volume was 350,000 vehicles, and this year is expected to be close to 600,000 vehicles. So that's an increase in volume of close to 70%, but just in imports, it's an increase of almost 120%. That's around 200,000 more vehicles that are being imported to Lázaro Cárdenas. So vessels arriving to the port, of course, there are not enough spaces in the port, unfortunately. That amount of vehicles demands a lot of trucks. By the way, the split in Lázaro Cárdenas between exports and imports is 65% exports, imports and 35% exports. So that means that a lot of trucks needs to be in Lázaro Cárdenas, and they need to go there empty. And loading in a port is it takes always more time than maybe loading in a plant, right, or in another distribution center. So that definitely impacts the way that the rotation of the trucks is slower, and I mean, it affects, of course, the whole capacity of the trucks around. Of course, not everything is about Lázaro Cárdenas. There is, in Mexico, we have a fleet of around 2,500 trucks, Holloways, and that is just the number of the total quantity of the trucks, but it doesn't mean that all of them are operative or are working, right? So we need to take out from this number the trucks that are already, that they need maintenance. That's something that always happens in this business. And there is a big issue, as all you know, about the drivers. There is a lack of drivers all in North America. So these capacities definitely impacted, and the fleet is not enough or much for the current needs of the industry. Then we go and take a look. If we move, please, to the next slide. We take a look to Veracruz, which fortunately the situation is much better. And I'm not saying this because I'm from there. In 2020, the volumes were around 750,000 vehicles, and this year is expected that the volume is close to 860,000 vehicles. So that's an increase in volume of 12%, which is a more moderate increase. And the imports split remains the same, basically, and the exports increased 20%. In addition to the current situation of Veracruz, I had a meeting with the Port Authority a few weeks ago, and I went with them to this area that they have in rehabilitation to operate vehicles. This area is supposed to be ready by April next year, and will add around 6,000 more spaces, static capacity to the port. So that means a 20% increase in the current capacity of the port. In the port of Veracruz, we have a static capacity of around 32,000 vehicles. And as well, they shared with me that they will announce by the end of this month a reduction in the rates of wharfage for exports. They are incentivizing the exports. So that's definitely good news, and as you can clearly see, and I already mentioned, the situation in Veracruz is much better. Yeah.
Excellent to hear. Some great insights there, and obviously for our audience, we will be making these slides available again in the app for you to look at your leisure. So thank you, Antonio. Raul, big party last night, very much enjoyed it. RPM is launching here in Mexico, launched yesterday, I believe, so second day on the job.
Kind of, yeah.
So as a new player entering the market here, what are some of the opportunities you see for the region, specifically for RPM, but also for vehicle logistics, and how might you be planning to alleviate some of these capacity challenges that we've already touched upon?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. Well, we would like to be seen more than a new player in the market. We would like to be seen as a collaborative asset to all the players in the market. We would like to be seen as a party that enhances the solutions for everybody, their offer. Regarding capacity concerns, obviously we face the same situation all across North America. In Europe, there's its own situation there, obviously. We think that the industry tends to have a siloed approach to solving problems. Our model tries to work against that. So we try to bridge those gaps between the different participants in the market, the ones that are actually, doing the investments. Where is the best way to go? Try to develop that network understanding. Obviously, we don't say that we're going to be able to solve every capacity or a constraint or problem that we have in the industry, but we definitely think that we can bring a new approach to usual problems.
Yeah, excellent. And in terms of that new approach, my next question was going to be, is the current vehicle logistics model still fit for purpose? We've gone through extreme change, extreme challenges these last few years. Does vehicle distribution in Mexico, in North America, need a rethink?
We think it's going through a constant rethink. There's a constant reshuffling of supply and demand. This is what we've been seeing in the last couple of years, or maybe even more, and we think that it's going to continue. So we're going to have to be adjusting to that all the time. Everybody's going to have to become more agile. In our case, as a non-asset-based provider, we're agile in the way that we work, and we can pivot that capacity and try to support the industry wherever it's needed. So yeah, I think this is going to be continuing. Things that don't even have to do with the industry itself are going to continue impacting capacity. The relationship between the consumer and the different products, what the product availability, used car market, all that's going to continue affecting the industry. So yeah, it's going to need a rethink, but it's going to be a continuous rethink.
Perfect, thank you. Daniel, let's bring you into the conversation. North America and the US in particular continues to experience extremely low level of inventory. We did see some green shoots of optimism that inventory levels are improving, but it still means that speed to market for finished vehicles is more important than ever. So how, from KHS's perspective, from the repair and the damage quality management side of things, how are the demands changing on your services and this part of the sector?
Thanks, Richard. Well, it's been growing exponentially, of course. So when we went from a situation where there were no cars produced to have a bunch of cars already produced and waiting on yards, Of course, that creates a lot of complexity in operations, especially when you cannot ship out all these cars at the rate we will all want to see. So that creates a lot of challenges from long-term storage maintenance to regular ITI. So it has been growing exponentially, but not only on the ITI section, so ITR section, or in-transit repair section. It has been growing from way even before production. So we've seen a lot of constraints and a lot of issues with raw materials, produced modules for the cars, how to get a car built fast enough so we can keep deploying solutions to our customers and cars to our customers. So yeah, I mean, of course, being a premier vendor for tailor-made solutions for OEMs, it's been very hard lately, and very encouraging to keep improving processes and be laser focused, as Jonathan says, being flexible and agile to develop all these very specific solutions that are very unique in its own perspective, from brand to brand, to yard to port to port, and also from country to country. So as you mentioned on the question, so the U.S., as everybody knows, has been facing a huge labor shortage. So it's really hard to expand at the rate or capacity that we need to supply all these solutions to our customers. So yeah, it has been exponential.
Yeah, so I mean, just building on that, so how have you been adapting your operations, knowing that labor can be not necessarily the answer? So how have you been thinking outside the box in order to provide a greater service, quicker turnaround times, and get the vehicles back in the supply chain?
Well, thankfully enough and gracefully enough, KHS has always been operating and thinking outside the box. So we're the solutions company for all these weird situations that happens even before production, through production, in the logistics chain, supply chain, all the way to recycling cars. So we have been blessed by that scenario, having more than 3 decades experience doing all these types of solutions. So that gives us the opportunity to develop strategies, for example, during the microprocessor shortage, where we will have yards full of cars with just one batch of modules. We will go out to the yard, harvest those modules, put them back into production so that plant will not shut down. They keep producing cars with those modules, then those cars get to the yard, and we harvest that module back again, so on. So instead of producing just one car with one module, we were able to support our customers on a scenario where we were able to produce 7 cars with just one module, until finally all the modules arrive and we can install those modules on all those cars and make them ready to get them across that finish line. So that type of solutions has been really helpful for the industry, we think, adding value to our customers. So that's just one of the examples in just one of the part shortages, but we were also very involved in just helping tier 1 or tier 2 vendors on their production with manpower to get parts ready for the production line, so they can deliver those parts to the assembly plants and get more cars ready. Of course, we're not a logistics partner per se. We do carry some operations on yard holding units, overflow yards, and all that situation, but for sure, we're no vascular RPM to provide a solution to get the car, logistically to a dealer. But we do add a lot of value on the chain, on developing and managing and deploying super fast solutions, sometimes even within 24-hour time frame to our customers.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Jonathan, you touched upon it in kind of your opening remarks about evolving strategies and operations to secure capacity, excuse me. Can we delve a little bit deeper into that and can you share some examples how you've altered your flows or transport modes perhaps to avoid bottlenecks?
Yeah, I think that in our case, since this whole situation with COVID started in 2020, we realized the possibility that our inventories would grow. So we started proactively looking for to develop infrastructure in record time to face that reality and simply adapt to it. Then we started working closely with our counterparts at the manufacturing side, at the planning end, and obviously with our final customers, in this case, our dealers, to make sure that we were prioritizing what is more demanding across the globe. And leveraging our scale and our partnership with our service providers, we created, I heard that Chris mentioned earlier, like a war room type of dynamic, virtually, on top of everything, where we were sort of capitalizing the opportunities that were happening at the same time. Examples in particular, we have built what we call unit trains between point to point, thanks precisely to our scale and our volume. Where it's possible, we have introduced new carriers to our book of business, new partners that always wanted to work with us, and that we're open the doors for them to participate. We had to switch some volume from rail to truck. Despite the shortages, there was not really a lot of options. And finally, we have been flexible enough to react to take capacity that others cannot take. Whenever there is a disruption with somebody else that forbids them for taking space in a vessel, for taking rail cars, for taking trucks, we fortunately have the capacity to take that additional capacity so we can take advantage of it and help ourselves to move the vehicles along. As I said at the beginning, there's not that many options to move a finished vehicle. We have explored other alternatives, but some of them, unfortunately, are not cost effective, right? Right now, with the prices of ocean rates, loading a vehicle in a sea container or in an intermodal container is simply something that would eat the profit margin that we make on a vehicle.
Yeah, and I'm interested to pick up on that, where you're picking up capacity from, say, other OEMs who couldn't fulfill orders or had to stop their production. Presumably this requires a huge amount of flexibility and agility, but also having that knowledge that capacity has become available in a very short period of time. So how has that come about? Because obviously planning cycles would have shifted dramatically to a very, very minute level.
Well, I mean, it's not a secret that there's an excess of inventory in all OEMs. So most of the times what we have done since a long time ago, before the pandemic, is to sort of play offensive and make sure that we are not keeping the inventory at our plants and that we keep a continuous flow of vehicles, for instance, to ports. So whenever there is, without obviously exceeding our space and our dwell time, so whenever there is an opportunity, most of the times our inventory is right there. To your point, yes, it is required a lot of flexibility on our end, and that is in some way supported by our data management capacities, or capabilities, sorry, and again, especially to the flexibility and the professionalism of our people and the relationship that we have with our carriers. For sure, if all of a sudden an ocean carrier tells us that, oh, by the way, I have 1,000 spaces in a ship that is going to sail 1 week from now, it requires a lot of flexibility to all of a sudden just change your plans and load it. But as I said at the beginning, that has been the name of the game over the last 2.5 years. And that's what has worked for us, because unfortunately, in these unprecedented times, there's not a single recipe to keep moving either material or vehicles. You have to be adaptable, or you simply will stay behind.
Excellent. Antonio, we had the pleasure of welcoming you on stage back in 2020, and we heard about CSI Group's investment into new storage facilities at Port of Veracruz. I'm interested to know how those facilities have developed since, and perhaps keeping with the theme of agility, are they being used in the way, in the manner that was originally designed? Or are you now utilizing that perhaps for storing vehicles that need to be retrofitted or incomplete finished vehicles?
Right, thank you. Well, yes, we did make a big investment in Veracruz, in a parking garage. It's a 6th-floor building with a capacity up to 10,000 vehicles. That added to the current capacity of the port, or increased the current capacity of the port 30%. But the users of this facility, first of all, they have certainty because they know that their vehicles are going to have the space needed to receive them. As well, it's a totally enclosed facility that allows the vehicles to be protected from the weather conditions and reduce cost of maintenance in different type of services. And well, I would say that the usage of the building is just being the way we expected. We started the operations there back in January 2020. Of course, we got a little bit worried in March and April 2020, but fortunately by September that year, the whole space was already committed, basically with export users, and they are not really using it as an storage point. I mean, that's not the idea, of course. And in addition to let's say having the capacity to receive the vehicles, also in the facility there are specialized areas to perform services such as body shop and homologation, accessorization, that reduces a lot the time. And I mean, instead of doing the services maybe in the plant, they can just do it in the port before the vehicle gets loaded. So in general, definitely that it helped a lot, the bottleneck that we had in Veracruz, which was terrible about 4 or 5 years ago. And in addition to that, we also invested in expanding our distribution center, which is 21 kilometers from the port. Now we have a current capacity, static capacity of around 17,000 vehicles. And with that, we have been able to offer to our commercial partners flexibility. I mean, we operate in open areas of the port. We offer the parking garage. We have a facility close to the port. We got the trucks to move the cargo. So in that sense, I mean, definitely the situation is much better now.
Excellent. Let's turn our attention to digitalization within vehicle logistics. And Raul, perhaps I'll come to you first on this. With markets so volatile, logistics and supply chains kind of more challenged, more disrupted than ever, has digitalization simply become a higher priority?
I think it is. It's always been like that. That's the goal, right? Try to be able to see what's going on and where's your product, where you're going to have the constraints before you even get the product. We think that the main focus for digitalization should be eliminating repetitive, non-value-adding activities. That should be the main driver. And so that the people that's actually doing those activities is able to do something else with much more value. We think that there are obviously limitations to that visibility. So, in theory, we should be able to, as a provider, you should be able to access information. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case all the time because there's security concerns, there's interfacing concerns. So I think that we should continue to develop that interaction, or maybe even build platforms that can support it.
Excellent. Daniel, I want to turn, you mentioned labor-intensive, Raul mentioned labor-intensive activities there, but turning to you, Daniel, damage repair, vehicle maintenance can be a labor-intensive activity. So how is technology and digitalization helping evolve your processes, make them more efficient, and support your partners better?
It absolutely plays a huge role. It's very important for especially quality departments on manufacturing facilities to have clear view on what's going on every specific vehicle or VIN number. So we rely a lot on technology to do multiple checkpoints across the operations we do, so we can relate to our customers almost real time what's the status in a very specific process or retrofit, for example. So that gives a lot of traceability, that gives a lot of accountability, and it gives a lot of reassurance for the quality departments that everything it's moving along accordingly, according to plan, and also helps a lot for the logistic departments to see what's the percent of the campaign looking like. Where are we right now? Well, we already covered 26% of that campaign. So that helps a lot to take decisions on the top upper management levels, and gives a lot of reassurance. So yeah, for us, it's a key component on our operations.
And Jonathan, from your perspective, how are GM utilizing technology to, again, advance their supply chains, be it on the asset tracking side or potential yard management? How are you utilizing it and prioritizing certain aspects of the supply chain for your gain?
Yeah, fortunately, we were already working in certain initiatives before the pandemic to develop certain tools for us to be able to have that traceability plus some EDI connectivity that we already had in place. We also were building some in-house tools to improve the level of visibility in frequent basis of our main operational KPIs. So by the time that we went into working remotely, because that's the other important piece, all the logistics organization has been working remotely from their homes for 2.5 years already. So technology was a big enabler. So the combination of all that was precisely what has been facilitating the fact that we continue to keep running the business effectively, and being able to manage the challenges that we are having right now in terms of inventory and capacity shortages. So we have several tools that are allowing us right now to do that effectively, that were sort of in place and developed before the pandemic. And the situation and the context in which we have lived over the last 2.5 years just enhance even more the fact that, or make more evident the fact that the digitalization and making sure that we have technology where it makes sense, it was a right move, and it's something that we need to continue to explore.
Excellent. Antonio, from your perspective, the role digitalization is playing in your operations?
Well, it has always played a very important role, not only just to track the vehicles, but as well through our system, we have total visibility in order to see which services are required to these vehicles, which services are already performed. And that's just talking about the platform, but for example, in our body shops, either in the port or our distribution center, we have invested in the best technology. For instance, in the machines used to mix the painting. So with that they are totally digital machines, and that definitely ensures the quality of the service.
Really interesting and very specific purposes there, but yeah, a huge wealth of opportunity there for digitalization, so really interesting to hear. We're getting fairly close to the end of the session, but I'd like to ask if the audience has any questions, please raise your hand. There's a gentleman in the middle, if we can get a microphone there, please. Just say your name and company as well, please.
Thank you, Robert Zavala with Wallenius Wilhelmsen. This is a question for Jonathan. So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned about General Motors being able to keep a steady production through 2022. Witness that maybe even like to pre-pandemic levels or more. So can you share some insight as to what kind of strategy did you use, or what was the secret behind being successful with keeping that production plan for 2022?
Thank you. All our purchasing organization located both in Mexico and US, recognized the threat that we had in front of us since it became evident that the lockdowns in China would impact our ability to keep receiving parts. So there were some proactive strategies that were put in place from a commercial standpoint earlier in 2021 that now are minimizing the impacts that we are having in terms of components availability. That's one. Second one is GM purchases $20.5 billion in Mexico of components. We have more than 620 business partners in Mexico. So our level of localization was already quite high. For sure, we continue to have certain dependency on Asia and overseas, but we are not so dependent at the degree than other OEMs. So the combination of that proactivity with our overseas partners, some of the flexibility that we had on the supply chain and logistics that I mentioned before, the collaboration with the manufacturing planning and our dealership network to make sure that we were prioritizing what it makes sense. It's what I think as a whole help us to keep our plants running pretty steady during this year, which obviously we were not able to do before because we were sort of just building that strategy as we were moving.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to just move to sort of the final questions for each of you. We're getting very close to time, so just some short reflections perhaps on these. Raul, I'll come to you, and just in terms of understanding we're in a very reactive state right now as an industry, and doing whatever the industry doing whatever it can to keep the vehicles moving. How does this factor in when we start to think about sustainability, new KPIs coming in, the new targets being set by the global organizations? And again, what sort of role can RPM play, but other logistics providers too?
Well, obviously the main goal is going to continue to be moving cars, right? Getting the cars to the market. I think that this is a good opportunity right now to look at the networks as a more regionalized, with a more regionalized vision. We've actually seen that some of the OEMs are already taking steps towards that, doing things that actually I never thought were going to be possible. And I think that those kinds of solutions are going to continue to be brought up and implemented in the future.
Excellent, thank you. And Jonathan, final kind of question for you. With GM investing in this plant in Ramos to produce electric vehicles from next year, I believe, and plans to export to more than 45 countries, what are the considerations from a logistics perspective and distribution network for electric vehicles, and how are you planning versus what you've been used to with ICE vehicles?
Well, the electric vehicles for sure require certain level of customized handling that will require some specialization in terms of the workforce that will be managing those vehicles in the yards and across the entire chain. There's the evident need of building certain level of infrastructure, charging infrastructure for those vehicles whenever they are passing through the supply chain. But other than that, reality is that moving an electric vehicle versus an ICE vehicle is essentially the same. So there were some concerns back in the past about the weight of the vehicles and how that would play a role. Reality is that after testing, we haven't seen any major impact in either the efficiency of the equipment, neither rail, neither truck. Maybe there will be some obviously tractor efficiency impacts because they are dragging a more heavier load, but other than that, it's just about the infrastructure and the special handling that requires obviously manage a vehicle with so much horsepower and the risk obviously of maybe an accident if somebody is not being careful enough to drive something so powerful versus a nice vehicle.
Excellent. And Daniel, final question to you, just in terms of maybe building upon that actually, handling of electric vehicles, what, from your perspective, the training and specialist skills required, how are you starting to prepare, develop your workforce and the sector as a whole?
Well, actually, it's quite simple. Don't touch the orange wires. You'll be fine. Nah, just kidding. There's a lot of training involved. So, of course, there's considerations in hybrid and full electric vehicles, as Jonathan was mentioning. So, for sure, we have a year-round training program, especially for technicians that could be exposed to a hybrid or electrical vehicle. So it really depends on what type of activity we're doing on the car or around the car. But yeah, for sure, training is a huge part. And we have our training center in our head offices to do year-round training, our techs.
Excellent. So plenty of preparation and planning still to do as we welcome electric vehicles to come. So, and Antonio, final question to you. Maybe a simple one. What are your expectations for 2023? Is it a continuation of the current challenges, or will we see some easing of the current situation?
Well, that's
perhaps not so simple.
Yeah, it's not that simple. Well, I would say, I mean, in my opinion, I would say that the first 3 months of next year are going to be as complicated as these last ones of this year. That in general, the situation will remain the same. I mean, at least for the first, for 6 or 8 months next year. And I think maybe by the end of next year, the situation will not be as complex as now, because at least we will have time to take a look to the infrastructure and try to make a few changes. I would like to focus my comment basically on the trucking, because I mean as I mentioned, the current fleet of trucks is not enough, and unfortunately the trucks producers or factories are not giving a very good visibility in when they can deliver the trucks. For example, in our case, we have been waiting for part of the renewal of our trucks for more than a year. So I think that the quantity of trucks is the major issue. Fortunately, at some point, I think we should remain being creative in order to look for other options. Previously, I mean, earlier it was mentioned about in the Pacific side, maybe using other ports. They are also, the capacity is not the best, but that's something that could help. Using more the rail to move product from ports to distribution centers. Also, we have talked a lot about vessels. Instead of calling Lázaro, they could go to Veracruz, where of course it's going to be longer time. I mean, if they come from Asia, but in Veracruz at least the situation is much better, and with the changes being done there, I think it could be handled more volume. In the meantime, other major changes occurs.
Yeah, so I'm getting a sense of cautious optimism again. It's unfortunately not going to be another easy year. So going into next year, but there's green shoots, there's optimism, and perhaps there should be a real focus then for the time being on that flexibility, that agility, and really how that industry can work together and those partnerships can thrive. So some great insights from my panel. I've taken too much of your time already, so I want to say thank you very much to my guests.
Gracias.